Yes, Mr. Witter.
I'd like to thank the real estate lady back here for mentioning something we just forgot with our 100 active, which is our park.
Yeah.
Arlington Park, the only one in the state of Vermont with a golf course.
Donation.
The last 7 years that I've kind of been in charge, I believe we've increased population and usability quite a bit, but there's a long way to go yet. The other thing that I would just bring up, having kind of caught up in it when we talk about making multi-family homes, or if you want to add the park to your house or stuff like that, that kind of rearranges your tax bracket.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's probably a reason some people don't do that. It takes them out of the homestead and all of that. It doesn't help very much. I just want to throw them things out. But thanks, Faith, I get to that. But for bringing that up about the park, I am proud of the park.
That's a great part.
Just one other thing I will mention in the park, there will be a walking path, sidewalk, all the way to the park.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, I've been there many, many times.
So we're so well organized, Holly and I. We just decided how we're going to do that right now. Right?
We make adjustments with the flow of the program.
I used to drive my parents crazy when I was in high school, because I definitely waited until 7 o'clock in the morning to do my term paper and do it at 8:30. I was one of them. That may be why, as I tell my kids, when they come home with a 75 on paper, I tell them that was my total grade for 4 years of all my classes. So look, thank you for your patience today, and this has been a pretty incredible conversation. You know, some stuff, what the original plan was, and what Holly and I were just talking about, is I was going to kind of go through a little bit of a traditional SWOT analysis, right? Hey, what's our strengths? What's our weaknesses? What's our opportunities? What's our threats? We have beat our weaknesses to death. I don't think anybody, including Keith, wants to talk about the septic system again. We know we have a problem delivering the byproduct to the place where it's supposed to go. So we know that, and we're going to capture that, and we'll talk about that in the report. We've also, I don't think anybody needs for us to restate what we think the strengths are of our community, and because our problem isn't about selling our community. It's not about creating jobs. It's about finding places for people to live, because they know we recreate well here, that there's a great social fiber here, that our school system is strong, that we provide opportunities that other communities don't. So I'm not going to go over all those strengths again, unless somebody wants to mention something that we didn't talk about before. What I'd like to do is kind of go to the column of, yes.
Well, I was just going to mention, you know, along the idea of the strengths of the community that you have here in Arlington. A park with a golf course? I had no idea until just 5 minutes ago. I mean, that's
It's free. It's a donation.
that's phenomenal.
You can knock out 9 holes in 20 minutes.
Unless it's baseball game.
Communicate that out. Let people know. Like, that's an asset that you have. And then the other thought that came to mind immediately after that for me. I had no idea Norman Rockwell used to be here, or that the Green Mountain Boys originated.
So
right
Patrick,
here until I got my tour of East Arlington. I mean,
Can I put this in perspective for you?
Yeah.
We talked about this at our renewal project meeting last night.
Okay.
Tomorrow is the anniversary of what?
D-Day.
D-Day. 75 years ago, and I was saying last night at the renewal project, I'm making arrangements to take one of my early mentors in life out to lunch to celebrate D-Day. Some of the people may know him that live in the area, but it's Wally Madison, who was the captain at Bennington PD. He was one of my early mentors in life. And while he landed on the beaches, his description of this is a little more graphic. I'll just put it at, he got shot in the buttocks. You can imagine how he describes that. But I spent countless hours with this guy when I was a young fella, and never really, and I'm going to make a connection back to Arlington Patrick in a minute. Never really fully understood what D-Day meant until I got a little bit older. Because you got to remember, I didn't do well in high school, didn't pay a lot of attention in history class. and until I got a little bit older. And here's the significance of us here in Arlington. How many people are familiar with the paintings of the Four Freedoms? You know where the original paintings are right now? Right now. They're in France to celebrate the 75th anniversary of D-Day. They were painted right here, about 4.5 miles down the road. If you went out the driveway to Bobbin Hill and take a left, about 4.5 miles down, you will find Rockwell's museum, or excuse me, Rockwell's studio, where those paintings were painted. Why are those significant? Because those were sold as part of bonds, correct? Bonds is the right term. They were sold as part of bonds, and Don, you know this better than me. How much money was raised in 1943?
They raised 133 million, which is the equivalent in today's dollars of 2 billion.
So Patrick, take that home with you. That happened here in Arlington, Vermont.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is like, Mac Molding is a great asset.
Third largest manufacturer.
Orbis is a great asset, but don't forget about those other assets that might also attract people to come here and might make those decisions.
Right. There's so many people that want to come here. I can't tell you.
So I'm going to take 2 points, because I'm just making this point that we know what our strengths are. I don't want to spend a lot more time talking about strengths, but you had a point?
Oh, I was just going to say my great uncle is in the Four Freedoms. Freedom of speech.
I love it.
Yeah.
You're not old enough to be in the great point.
For those of
We
you,
don't
sorry.
spend as much on our golf course, but the nice little courses is Equinox spends on one hole.
But the superintendent of the rec park knows that.
And we are free of any hazard.
Yeah, so I guess the point I'm just trying to make is like, you all certainly know that stuff, but us, like myself coming in,
Didn't know.
didn't. So I'm just saying that those are strengths that can also be marketed.
So, starting in August, you're right in Mount Pilgrim, then you walk over to the State Museum. We will have a display in the State Museum from August to February on Rockwell and the illustrators of the day. So anyway.
So for those of you who are not from Arlington and maybe you don't understand how diverse the Arlington Area Renewal Project has been, I know we mentioned the farmers market, but I do think as you learn more about us or you want to talk us up, you know, when you get back to your offices, your state or federal office, we're telling our story. We developed a new website. If you go, it tells why you should come to Arlington. It's not a government website. It's just listing, you know, our committee meetings. It lists the sites to see. It lists the inns that we have. So we are trying to tell that story. Last year we had a Four Freedoms Festival, right? Which was about the Four Freedoms, with amazing, which I have to add, was a reunion of the models. Many of the models still live here. So when you go back to your state and federal offices, talk Arlington.
Absolutely.
What's the web address, please?
ArlingtonVermont.com.
Okay. So, we know what our strengths are. We know what our weaknesses are. You know, we know what we need to address. How about some suggestions now? When we put this report together, and I put goals down, and if you, again, we're not going to talk money, okay? So we know we have a septic system issue we need to focus on, right? Kate brought up surveying, John Williams brought up surveying. Surveying of the employees. Kurt made the point very clear about, you know, the cost of housing, building housing is expensive. So we know we need to potentially look at density housing, right? I loved Amy's point about, and this is why you do these kind of things, going all the way back to our perspective thing in the beginning, right? The fact that her mom has this 3-bedroom house, and this is the story of Kim and Jim Baker, right? 2,400 square foot house. Every time I have to mow the lawn, I tell her, this is not going to go on forever. At some point, I'm going to have a 4-bedroom, 2.5 bath house on a little under 2 acres of land for sale. But where am I going to go? Where's Mary Ann going to go? Right, so this is a great idea about, and somebody had mentioned this to me in passing 2 days ago. Do not forget the older generation and that they need housing as well, right? And a place to be. So we've captured that. Kate made a point about collaboration amongst the HR departments in the community, right? Now, they can collaborate, but if we don't have rental property or property for folks to move into. But just the fact that they will collaborate can be a place, in my mind, when I heard you say this, that we can start identifying the problems you're having, right? Nicole emailed a few of us at the end of last week. Said, hey, I need help. I have a couple employees, got nowhere to live. Can you have any suggestions? I had one suggestion, Keelan had one suggestion, that was it. There were no other suggestions. So collaboration amongst HR folks. What else, if we could wave a wand, and we know it would help solve this whole conversation we had today, what are the other points? I know Jerry had to leave, but go, Lori.
Well, you know, I don't think that it was only touched on the number of distressed and or abandoned properties within the town limits. And to me, the, let's say, renovation, potential renovation, and because they've got the infrastructure in place, right? I mean, in most cases, that to me is kind of a low-hanging fruit. It's a little bit of a low-hanging fruit if you're not displacing people.
Okay, I'm going to make the distinction with the distressed properties. So certainly if they're unoccupied, they do present opportunities.
Yes, those are the ones I'm talking
Right,
about.
okay. Because obviously the occupied ones, they present some unique challenges.
Yeah, the low-hanging ones.
Right, okay.
Unoccupied, distressed.
But we're on this subject, right? And I know other people had their hands up. The other conversation that happened is properties that are distressed, that are occupied. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. When it comes to the ability to figure out housing, somebody mentioned this earlier. You know, if you drive by and something looks like a landfill, it's going to be very hard to convince the investors. For example, strapping investors together to build rental property, if they know their value of their property is not going to be up to the max. So I would also put down enforcement of distress property.
Enforcement is really.
And or, Holly, and or the ability to change potential ordinances to deal with that.
Okay, I'm going to go one step further, taking up the earlier comment, which is the enforcement not only of zoning, but health. Zoning and health for both occupied and unoccupied distressed properties. Okay, is that all right?
Jim, in our table, we talked about health officers having more strength and more power in Vermont as a result of recent changes.
Yes.
And I think we need to be sure that we're enforcing and finding more ways to enforce changes.
Right. So I think Rudy would tell you, in my days in Rutland, one of the most powerful tools we used in changing neighborhoods was the fire chief and the health officer. Now, I was the police chief, and the health officer had more authority than I had. He can literally enter a house based on cause without having to get a search warrant. If I did that, I'd get sued, right? So I think, again, going back to Kate's point about having a healthy community, we want folks living in a healthy housing too. Ludi, on this issue, I'm going to call you out because I kind of said to you at lunchtime, if we could talk about it. I know Ariane is here. We're working with you, and you're working with the housing conservation folks on a potential opportunity here. Would you mind sharing that?
Certainly, and we're working with Ariane Kissam, who is the representative here from Vermont Housing Conservation Board. So we are proposing a project. The project is designed to respond to this need for more funds than are currently probably available to an individual home buyer or to an investor to make repairs to these homes that are distressed, that have gone past the point of reasonable cost repairs. What do we do about them? And if we don't do anything about them, they just get worse and they cause more distress to the rest of the community, the houses around them, and it's a loss of our village housing, our village architecture, our village culture, etc. So our project is a pilot that we're proposing whereby with funds, GRAP funds, through the housing bond issue that was approved a couple of years ago, we would have a grant to a new home buyer of one of these special properties with a sort of match subsidy for every dollar that she puts into her new homes, that really to benefit a whole community in doing so. So that's essentially what we're kind of proposing for a while. The homeowner would work with us. We'd have a scope of work planned so that all the repairs and all the sort of funds that are subsidized in particular go into the first issues, health, safety, and efficiency. If the homeowner wants to make additional investment that, such as an additional unit or, an additional bedroom or something like that, that would be a separate investment on her part. I like using her. But it would be an incentive and some assistance at making repairs to these homes that are kind of beyond the point of no return. Not the ones that need to be demolished, but the ones that have value to us and the ones that are just too expensive for a single family to take on.
It's such a much better option than like a reverse mortgage situation, because so many of my older sellers, just get stuck in the reverse mortgage and they can't get out. So this is a great option, and I'm just curious to hear more about resale and how that would work.
Under this project that would be funded, if we're lucky, to be funded by VHCB, the houses would go into perpetual affordability, the shared equity model. So and Ariane can explain this better than I, since she runs that particular program, but it would come, the grant of up to $70,000 would come with the stipulation that a portion of that is shared with, a portion of the appreciated value would be shared so that the property stays perpetually affordable to the next buyer. Do you want to explain that better to everybody?
Yeah, I think you explained it right. A portion of the subsidy is intended to stay with the house and would transfer to the next owner, and that each seller agrees to share some of any market appreciation.
So that each time the house is sold, it comes with a purchase subsidy to make it more affordable each time it's sold. And the in our current proposal, are we talking about under 120 AMI?
In terms of
in terms of the eligible buyer.
Oh, right, yes, under 120% of median.
Yeah, so the eligible buyer, eligible for the subsidy, would qualify with an income up to 120% area median income, which is a very generous, it's still moderate income, it's still households that need help. There's, we've done all the statistics, and it's still the household that needs help, but it's a little broader eligibility than some of the other programs.
I bring this up, hold on, Rick, I'll forget this. I bring this up because I asked Louis to talk about it, because I think one of the things that ought to go on our list for just listening to our delegation talk is the ability for us to explore grants, right? And I had to leave the room for a few minutes. I heard Diane talk about, and I know Keith left, and thank you for saying this, because it is important that the next town administrator, the first ever town administrator, really needs to know grants and know how to apply for grants. Because a lot of the secret sauce is in the grant process such as this. Two other points. So exploring grants is something I'm making a recommendation on. What Rudy left out of that is 2 points. We have entered into a conversation with MAC. We'd love to talk to Orvis. That if one of these buyers, if we were to get the grant, and one of these buyers was a MAC employee, MAC is going to throw $5,000 on top of the grant. So $5,000 doesn't sound like a lot of money, but when you're scraping money together to try to buy a house, $5,000 is a deal. The other thing is going back to the playbook out of Rutland again, from Rudy and my days in Rutland. Mary Powell, the CEO of Green Mountain Power, has made a commitment on these houses that she'll work with us to make them carbon neutral. So that's huge. So you're talking solar, battery pack, pump systems that will make it, not only are they saving money Not, so what I like how you put up now is private-public partnerships that enhance housing in town, right? Because that's an important piece of the formula. Or you had a point, et cetera.
Yeah, you know, just listening to this, I'm thinking, so we're looking at Arlington 2025, right? So I think it might be good moving forward to kind of identify a couple of short-term goals, say 1-2 years, some mid-term goals, and some long-term goals. And I think one of the longer-term goals would be to start talking to Habitat and trying to develop a partnership to see how we can, you know, use their expertise, and I think it's really worth exploring.
So if I was to frame this, because one of the notes I wrote down when I was listening was potentially pulling together folks such as Habitat, Stephanie's folks from Shire, to talk about opportunities with partnerships with nonprofits. Does that capture that?
Yep.
Okay. I wouldn't call that long-term. I can think sitting here right now, a couple pieces of property that could eventually be a conversation with them about. So go ahead, Lori.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't know if I don't get them out, they get lost. If I don't get them out right away, they're gone. But in listening to the last panel and talking about the cost of new construction and so forth, and density, I think sometimes when I hear density, I hear huge apartment complex kind of things, you know, a couple of hundred units. I mean, to me, in Arlington, density would be maybe like 4 or 5 houses around a cul-de-sac. I'm thinking probably the same property you are. But maybe an alternative to explore as well would be manufactured homes. You know, not mobile homes, not trailers, but, you know, or what do they call them, modular homes or something? You know, where they just bring 2 pieces in, but you do all the finish work, you do the foundation and so forth. They can't possibly be as expensive as $240 a square foot.
Yeah,
Yeah, they are.
Unfortunately, they're very expensive.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
So let's go back. Hold on, because we're getting to the end of the day. So who would recommend short-term recommendations? We got, you know, septic is a short-term focus with a long-term process, right?
And we're defining short-term within the next year.
Right.
So
a year from
start
now,
a year from now, what would we like to see?
we didn't
done?
waste, you could come back to Arlington or take a drive around your town and say, I did not waste a day with Baker on June 5th.
I was just going to say, in terms of a short-term goal regarding the septic, to contact an engineer, and any kind of funding that you're going to go for, public funding or any kind, for an infrastructure project, is to require a preliminary engineering report. Okay. So if that's one of the goals, to bring that in and maybe start that process.
So Jim, just along those lines, Holly, Jim, I'll get to you in a second. Along those lines, collaboration between the town and the school on the current septic plan. Okay. Jim?
No, well, I just wanted to add to that, because before you do the engineering study, you really need to figure out what you need or want. So there's that, as I mentioned, the engineering planning advanced study, and I think that is what you need to do first for a short-term goal. I would really encourage that to be step one.
Yeah,
that will help you define what it is that you want and why, and then you can get into the engineering.
So what I don't understand is what Keith was talking about earlier, and he's left, but he's, this summer they're doing a study. What I heard him say was to check certain residents for failure systems. Different study than that.
Yeah, it would be a different study than that. I mean, this one was looking at what type of community multi-user system would be appropriate in different parts of the villages.
Okay.
I think it's important to mention the town of Jamaica, Vermont, in the village, recently went through this same scenario. Do we add public water or do we add public sewer? And one of the engineers hired by the town had contacted me to ask me from a real estate perspective, what would add more value to the homes in the village? So I just think maybe as a side note, it might be good for the town of Jamaica to be contacted and say, how did you go about looking into this project, the cost of it, who did you contact, who were the engineers involved?
So based on that, I remember one of the conversations, I'm looking at you, Jim, because it may have been in your panel. In the words I had, I could go back to my notes to find this, but I heard the words case study. Was that?
Yeah, that was for me. The Department of Environmental Conservation has several case studies with broken down villages like Jamaica and across the state, and what they studied, what they came up with, what the resulting user fees were for which types of systems. It's a really good information, and I can get you in touch with the right
Okay,
people.
fine. So what I'm hearing is, Faith is talking about case study in a different way, by just taking a ride out to Jamaica, sitting down with people. You're talking about a study that was done, case studies that were done and gathered.
Yes, Jamaica may very well be one of the ones that the state has. They, of all those projects that they've helped fund, they have a little synopsis available.
Okay.
And this is something that Jamaica is going through now.
Right.
So they haven't made a decision yet on either way, water versus sewer. So it would be good to pick somebody's brain.
Okay. So that's a short-term goal. Another short-term goal.
We agree that the survey should be a short-term goal? Okay, we'll make sure we
So we were discussing that for any project that we embark on or any town that we're looking at, we usually conduct a market analysis first to determine the need and specifically what the need is in terms of rental, home ownership, and what the demographics are, the existing housing stock. It includes all of that. So that informs, our next steps and how much we take this, how far we take this. So Ludi and I were talking about that being an important piece of this, is to do that market study.
With a couple nice with the survey.
Yeah.
If I could just add, because having been involved in housing surveys and needs analysis, not to the extent that you have, Stephanie, but they can be pretty tricky because a lot of times the focus is on doing an analysis of the resident population, and really what you're trying to get at is what are the needs and desires of the people who don't live here yet but would like to. And so I think working through the major employers in particular would be critical.
Okay. Thank you. Other short-term goals.
Are we talking just housing right now?
We are talking housing. What do you think?
Well, I was going to bring up something that, I'm sorry, what is your name? Lori said early on, we were talking at lunch, and as far as people talked about businesses leaving and bringing in new business, and how sometimes Vermont, we can be resistant to new businesses and knock it down before it even gets going. And she mentioned in a town that she was in that it would be great if we could do some kind of research on businesses we want to bring, companies or the type of.
See, I think, and I'm not trying to dispel.
For the planning of the town, to bring in to help, like, small businesses and sort of things to increase the population and that sort of.
You're talking about the type of businesses that would bring people to town.
Yes,
okay.
That we want here.
So I'm not, it's in the back of our minds, but I think the housing thing for us is a separate conversation.
Well, no, they have to have
and there are a lot of conversations going on in town. But again, I hate to, Keith's gone because I know his blood pressure, because he's got the message, he hears it. We know this business opportunities because we don't have it. We already know that.
Well, that's not necessarily true. There were businesses here, and there still are buildings, and they left. So I mean they're infrastructure that already are there.
Right, but the people that were interested in going, I'll take Cullinan's for example. Cullinan's used to be the store. There was someone interested in going in there to put down a sit-down type cafe. Can't do it. Can't get licensed for it. Doesn't have septic.
Okay.
So we lost the restaurant in East Arlington because they were looking at another piece of property You want to do a sit-down, can't do it. So move the Williams down. I'm not trying to belittle this.
Well, right, but there are still places here that are,
Understood.
yeah.
But I want to focus on housing, and I'm not trying to belittle your point. We're well aware of it, but this report's really going to focus on housing. Because not that we don't need more jobs, it's just we need to find places for our employers, to put people. And then, for me, businesses follow after that.
So my experience with landlords is this. There's landlords who don't value the job of a realtor, so they list their rental units by themselves. That's why you're having such a hard time. The MLS is a centralized listing system where we have everything commercial, rental, land, everything for sale there, right? There are those landlords who value the work of a realtor and will list their homes with a realtor. So we know of some rentals that are available, but these guys or girls don't want to list on the open market. And my experience is two reasons. They don't want to pay, number one, but number two, when these guys list on the MLS with a realtor, they know for sure that that property will be inspected by the Vermont Fire Safety Commissioner. And that brings up the health aspect of rental units. So if these people sell their multifamilies or rent their multifamilies, they've all been inspected, they're all up to code, and they're good to go. These people want to avoid paying a commission to a realtor. They also want to avoid that fire inspection. And so that's where you have the lack of centralized resources. So my suggestion would be, as mentioned before, like you have a great list, you said that would be accessible to us, but perhaps there would be a good place for these guys to go list their rentals on our website somewhere, the Renewal Project website, or to just get a database together. Yeah. Was that a question for me?
How much of that would be related to the lead paint issue of not wanting to list?
Any home pre-1978, whether it's single family, multifamily, has to disclose about whether or not you know about the existence of lead-based paint. That's one of 20 things that could come up on a safety inspection. There could be GFCI outlets that are missing. There could be the wrong kind of paneling in these older homes that are not fire retardant. There could be lack of parking. There's a whole lot of reasons why people want to avoid those safety inspections. But I think if we did, if those people are going to make it a job of avoiding the work of a realtor, then maybe they list their properties
I think so.
for a place for you to access.
I recently read that Pownell is enacting an ordinance.
Oh, what?
An ordinance.
What is?
So the town of Pownell is enacting an ordinance that requires an actual inspection of every rental.
That's great.
So one capture it.
We've got two tax brackets in Vermont. There's homestead and non-homestead. And non-homestead is not just for second homeowners. Those are for investment properties, which include rental properties and multifamily properties. So if the towns know what these properties are, where they are, they should be actively going to inspecting them, but they're not. And the other reason, number 6 there, in enforcing zoning, you're never going to force somebody to paint their home. There are some people who have mental illness or a physical disability, they're not able to do those things. There are other people who intentionally don't want the assessed value to go up. So the inside of these homes are sometimes gorgeous, the outside, not so much.
So when we're talking about zoning, I have to go before. Yes, there are Bennington enacted an ordinance that has to do with the level of maintenance you have to do on the outside, right? And that does get into, you've got to paint, you've got to make sure your shutters are up, and things like that. But one of the things when we're talking about zonings, and Bill can talk to this better certainly than I can, all of this issue about buildable property, houses that are right now distressed properties that are actually on floodplains. Right, so it's a distressed property, it probably shouldn't be there, it's on a flood. So the zoning issues that I think Bill and I have talked about go much more to wetlands and floodplains and why there are distressed properties in those areas. As to I actually did talk to the select board about the Bennington ordinance. They weren't ready to go there, but that would be the next type of thing, which is Yes, not just the zoning, but also the appearance of the house through an ordinance.
So let's move beyond this conversation, because we've captured zoning and the issues around enforcement, the issues around inspections. Alan?
I was going to kind of take the hypocritical oath and say, do no harm. And we need to identify what makes our area unique, whether it's Arlington, Bennington County, or Vermont, and not detract from that in our future planning. And the thought that comes to mind is we're talking about high-density development. So we're going to put a couple high-density development units in East Arlington or Sunderland or Sandgate or wherever. What's going to differentiate that from a high-density development in South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey? And if we're not careful about that, it's not going to make any difference to the young professionals and the millennials where they live, as long as it's easy to live there. I just got back from vacation in North Carolina, and the bottom line is, it's just easier to live there.
Yeah.
They base their work week on a 35-hour work week. The professionals get off at noon or 1 o'clock on Friday. They've got wonderful recreational paths. They go out, they throw frisbee, they go to the beach. They have a life. And I compare that to the bumper sticker we see in Vermont that says moonlight in Vermont or starve. Which option would you go for where you're going to go? We're talking about retirement. Vermont is one of the third worst states for their policies on pensions and Social Security taxation. I'm glad to see Kathleen's here, because one of the challenges I'd like to give to our legislature is to find out what can make Vermont more affordable, not less affordable. And I think if that's kind of merged from a short-term goal into a long-term goal. I think the last time we really saw in a legislative initiative to do something about property taxes was Act 46. And if anybody's been following the news, we know what a contentious football that's been. They've talked about raising minimum wage. And I think there's two sides to every coin. If people aren't making enough money to live here, we need to raise their wages. That has all sorts of other implications. But the other side of that coin is, what makes it so hard to live, to afford to live here and so expensive? And what can we expect from our legislators to help us with that?
Okay, so I would capture, out of what Alan just said, I would capture, we want to be careful about how we develop housing, and there's opportunities for people, just not housing opportunities. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, and I think the other part I'm hearing is that we started off today talking about how we spend more of our income percentage-wise in Vermont towards housing. So it really is a cost of living issue for people, and how do you address that? As you said, in terms of taxes, in terms of any other economic development, in terms of wages.
We've identified a 30 to 40,000 or 30 to 40% cost differential between building in Connecticut and building in Vermont.
Yeah.
Where is that 30 or 40%? Is it in land acquisition, development, labor, tax?
So Holly, I would be interested in part of probing this, to take a look at this piece and spend some time with Kurt talking about the point Alan's making is, where is that 30 to 40% or 20 to 30%? It doesn't really matter. If it's even a quarter, that puts the development of housing almost out of reach.
It's not that long ago that it was much less expensive in Vermont. We see that in some of the products that we carry in our stores. People would say, oh, geez, where I'm from, this is so much less. And now they're coming up there and they're saying, geez, where I'm from, this is so much more. And they're not, switched there.
Fair enough. Nicole?
So my other hat is on the school board, and I will just say that there are people who will disagree with me, but all of this becomes irrelevant if we lose our school. And so in whatever way this group, the community, the town, ensuring that we maintain and grow a viable, vibrant school is critical to any efforts to try to cultivate and develop housing.
It's kind of a chicken and egg thing, right?
Yeah.
When Todd was on the panel today, we all know what he's going to say. We had, and we are growing our numbers at the school, but we got to figure out a way to keep that consistent.
Right.
Because,
But as a short-term goal, not related to housing, is an opportunity to market our school, which we haven't done before, to school choice students that haven't previously come here. That's not a housing issue. That's tapping into a community that has not yet taken advantage of. The second step of that is once we have housing, then we move new families in. But it's two pieces.
I think if you listen to the realtors in the room, they say people are looking at Arlington for the school.
They love it.
They're not looking at Arlington for employment opportunity. They're not looking at Arlington for recreation necessarily. They're looking at Arlington for the school. And people say, what used to bring people to Arlington? Arlington was viewed as a destination. We had the Candle Mill Village and that whole development up there, that people would actually take day trips or plan their vacation around going to East Arlington.
Yeah.
And to play off what Nicole said, right now I think we have that in our school. And that's what is attracting.
Oh, yeah. Because we're up there on number 1, number 2, people know that.
Yeah. We have people coming from Troy, from Albany, I have Nebraska. I mean, people know about our schools. And they're coming here because our schools are so good and also because our natural resources. And we already know all this. But I was
Short-term goals.
I was just going to say, I'd like to see maybe a couple affordable tiny houses. I think, you know,
he had a good idea.
And Bill did just mention, we just did our first tiny house in Arlington, so we have a template for that.
It's, what road is that?
Yes, Matt. Welcome back.
Yeah, hi. I'm wondering, I'm hearing some great ideas, and what I find often, and I'd love to know if Arlington has a plan, is you have a really great high school. So what's the communication plan? How do you funnel money into what is actually working? So your high school is something that works for you here, and I bet there'd be people all over the U.S. that if we worked on a communication plan, and so when I look at these verticals that you guys are tackling, housing, infrastructure, those are all, in my mind, verticals that the renewal project, but the horizontal is that communication of those types of things, and it's something I even think of like Bennington and Pownell I'm always bringing up, which is, yeah, start working on those like big things that are going to take 20, 30 years, but also be communicating across the board to the things that you do have going on. And so I was just telling Kate, okay, so how do you find $100,000 to give to your high school so that they can digitally, do what the state-to-state program is, which is tracking people that said, hey, do you want to grow up in a place that your kid receives? Our schools are 5-star rated. Some of the best schools in the state of Vermont. Move to Arlington, you get a peaceful view too while you're at it. And so how are we doubling down, I guess, is my question, in a communication capacity on the things that do work well for Arlington?
Well, in the state-to-state video that I saw, the young couple that's in Arlington, I was so excited to see that.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
Nicole and Brett, great group, and it shows that millennials do want to live in Arlington.
And I think the school, those conversations with Nicole, when we first started the renewal project, is that, and they have, now the communication director is full-time and is starting to communicate that stuff. I think the trick is to figure out, your point is how to communicate it beyond the community that's receiving the information now.
Yeah.
And I think that's worth the conversation. Right.
So one of the things that freaks my father out is when he has done a search on, any search engine, and then all of a sudden ads are popping up on his email or Facebook or something like that, and it freaks him out. We're used to that. We get that there's cookies that follow us and our search history, and we get that and we're used to it. It does get annoying at points, but to Matt's point, when someone searches small schools in Vermont, #1 schools in Vermont, wonderful sunsets, wonderful sunsets, acreage. How do we kind of start following those folks so that Arlington ads are popping up and saying AMHS, Fisher Elementary School, the Canfield Library, the Rec Park, the inns that we have in town, Mac Molding, Orvis. And so there's something to be said about that if we're looking at that demographic where we're used to being followed around, where it doesn't freak us out.
One of my favorite quotes from the State of State group, and it was actually Nicole that said it, who was in that Arlington video, and we said, why did you try out the State of State program? And she goes, we were looking in the Northeast and Vermont was the only one that invited us. So sometimes that's all what a millennial is, at least the beginning point of their adventure to find a new life is, they didn't look at Maine, they didn't look at, you know, other places, New Hampshire, they look at Massachusetts. Vermont was the one that was following them around on Google and said, hey, have you ever thought about a life in Vermont? So I think we can take some of those larger, like a state-to-state program that's doing that type of stuff and say, okay, how does that work for Arlington, and is it, you know, putting some money or resources behind that?
But the problem is, we can invite them here, there's nowhere to live. So that, I mean, that's the point. And again, I think it's one of my things, and I don't want to get into the politics of all this, but one of the challenges for me is on the state level, and Kathleen, I don't mean to direct this at you personally, but at the legislature itself, I think they'd be really hard to find to say one thing that they did in the legislature this year to deal with the housing thing.
I have one thing.
What is it?
Well, you know, it's a study, but
You don't need another study, Kathleen. I've worked in state government for 31 years. I can load a tractor trailer unit full of studies and drive it in here.
But what was it on?
Well, I did bring, I brought information down. I contacted, before I came down, my friends on the General Affairs and Housing Committee to find out what we had done, you know, this year specifically for affordable and workforce housing. And the recommendation, or the first idea from the committee, was that we generate another $50 million bond, like the $30 million bond that we did a couple of years ago. And unfortunately, but I'm sure for good reason, Treasurer Pierce recommended against that. She thinks our bonding capacity is maxed right now, at least that's my understanding. And so due in January, and I did bring down the language for you guys, and I emailed it to you, Holly,
Okay, thank you.
is a study on how the state can develop 1,000 more housing units over 5 years for residents with incomes up to 120%, so that range that we're talking about, and the financing mechanism to do that. So the study's due in January. I know it's not big action this year, but at least it's something that I can remember to keep an eye on for you guys, because when the new legislature begins and they come back with some kind of recommendation, maybe there will be something on there that you guys can jump on. So I know it's a little bone with a scrap of meat hanging on it, but it's what I have today.
Yes, it is. So other short-term goals.
I was just going to piggyback on that, though, that we've seen that 40% of young professionals in Vermont already have exit plans because their view of financial stability in Vermont just isn't there.
I know, they're really,
And it's, you're new in there, but it basically alluded to fiscal mismanagement at the state level, leaving us with a ton of debt, which drives our tax rate, which does not make the state appealing to people moving here. And that's not an Arlington thing. Statewide, and in my communication with you, Jen, is all of this work is great, but we need to understand that we're not the country of Arlington making up our own rules. We exist in a greater microcosm of influences that we need help with those influences before we can move the ball locally.
Well, and a microcosm that extends far beyond that to macro national trends where people are moving to warmer climates, they are moving to cities. So there are some macro trends that we shouldn't be defeatist about, but we're not going to be able to fight them.
But remember, we've heard loud and clear today, and I get all this and I understand it. I agree 100% now. Because I worked in state government 31 years. I can go on and on about frustrations in state government. What we heard loud and clear today is we are bucking the trends here. Our school population's going up. We have 1,000 employees. Other places are dying to find employees. So we are bucking the trend in certain degrees. There are these headwinds against us, but we know that we need more housing because we don't have the same situation other people have. And that we have an employment base. There is those headwinds and threats coming against us. But the short-term goals right now is when someone gets hired, and Florence didn't say it today, and I'm not speaking for Mac, but they could expand easily another 100 jobs here in town. But they're not gonna do that if they can't find employees and people that can live in the area. And so, I don't wanna discount the fact that the state has got major issues and that we live in that environment. You know, there's the retirement debt fund, there's the cleanup of Lake Champlain. Those are all bigger micro issues, but I still think we can tackle some of our problems. And call me silly if I am, and tell me I'm over optimistic if I am. But I think we can still tackle some of our housing problems at the local level to try to deal with Allie's story, right? That she can't find housing here, and she can't find affordable housing because we have no control over the college debt that she carries, but we ought to be able to find a solution to help her find some housing locally, is my point. So, long-term goals. I'm going to wrap this up by, yeah, it's almost 3. So we're all running out of gas. Long day. We use the term 2025. So if we were all to go into a time machine forward, 2025, what would Main Street look like?
Painted.
Painted?
Market.
A market?
Oh, that's nice.
New business.
A grocery store.
A grocery store.
Like a grocery store.
Okay, market, yeah.
You don't want
Local market. like-
Right, we want yes.
Pharmacy?
Pharmacy?
We did have one, yes.
Lori?
I was going to say a couple of what I would call mid-density neighborhoods. Let's call them neighborhoods,
Okay.
not developments. You know, my little cul-de-sac with, 4 different little houses, kids playing in the playground.
So, 2025, West Arlington at the Covered Bridge. Home in Norman Rockwell. Home of the most photographed covered bridge in the country.
Cell towers.
So,
You want to give millennials, they better get a cell phone. They won't come here.
Okay, I think
Annual
broadband,
Art Festival.
I think I think cell towers sometimes bring up real emotional responses. Kathleen.
Did you guys, I don't want to re-break ground, did you guys talk about the broadband bill? that we
Yes.
sent? Okay, no.
We didn't talk about the bill.
Well, we talked about the lack of broadband.
We didn't talk about the bill.
So we did pass a broadband bill that specifically targets rural communities and gives them some planning support and funding to try to build out broadband into rural communities. And I found out all I could about that before I came down. I'm not the expert, but Laura Sebelia, just one district over. This bill is her baby. She knows all about it, and it would be excellent
So how's the funding going to be
if
delivered?
we were to find out. There's some money in it.
But how's the funding going to be delivered?
They funded a full-time staff person to provide technical support to communities, and then there's some money for planning grants. So this is not like an $80 million bill. This is like a $2.5 million bill.
So through public service or through where?
Through community broadband initiatives like that EC Fiber model over in...
What I'm asking, Kathleen, is
Yeah.
what state agencies are going to manage?
I can't remember. It might be the Agency of Digital Services, but I'll send you guys info.
You forward that to Holly?
Yeah, it's in the notes I sent you, Holly. And again, I'm not the expert on this particular bill, but Laura Sebelia basically wrote it. And I know she'd be interested in helping find out if that applies to Arlington.
So West Arlington 2025, broadband services.
Say again.
West Arlington, how about 313?
Yeah, 313.
I did ask
West of the rec
I
park.
did ask the question. West Arlington 2025.
Oh, an art festival, an annual art festival
Okay.
around Norman Rockwell. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think 2025, the covered bridge is an attractive community altogether, that we address the one blighted property there by 2025.
So what I was trying to get at in my own cynical way is that no one here wants to see a housing development sitting next to the bridge. For good.
Yeah.
Okay. So we want.
There's a lot of floodplain out there, you might have a little trouble.
Yeah, I get it. I get, my point is, we want to make sure we preserve what is the beauty of our town. What brings people to our town. I think there's a handout back there.
So as a resident of East Arlington Road and really super lucky to have lived through the 100-year flood and have basically $700 worth of damage to my home. I'm now in a flood zone, and so we recognized that earlier as one of the issues for selling homes in East Arlington because of the additional expenses to flood insurance. Luckily, I've owned my home for 20 years, so I don't owe much on it, so it's all based on what your mortgage is left opposed to, so once I'm fully paid, I won't have to carry that extra insurance if I choose not to as the homeowner. But as a person who would love to sell my home, it will be hard for me. Again, I bought it as a starter home, and 20 years later I'm still there. So it's going to be someone else's starter home, and to expect that they can afford the insurance that goes along with it, I'm going to be kind of, no pun intended, but upgrade.
I've heard John say it. It was brought up by you, Kate. It was brought up by a couple of people. Is understanding in this process of identifying opportunities to expand housing, understanding our limitations because of the floodplain.
Yeah, the whole rezoning.
Which has changed dramatically.
Yes.
So understand. Okay.
So of that $600 worth of damage that happened when Irene came through, I've incurred about $3,000 of insurance alone since then. Luckily, I was grandfathered, so it was a slow increment. But for someone, and that's with the minimal mortgage that I have left. So just looking at those ramifications of such minimal damage to then have the federal government come in and tell me that I need to force my lenders to force upon me holding that insurance can be a huge curveball to
Can I just give you a little tip? For anybody that's thinking of selling their home and they have it grandfathered, the flood insurance, don't get rid of it because the new owner can then keep that grandfathered amount. If you get rid of it, their insurance is going to be about $5,000, and that's going to impact whether they buy your house.
I wasn't necessarily, so as far as my understanding, and maybe we can talk on the sidebar, but is that I was grandfathered in the sense that I wasn't going to have to carry full coverage, full flood insurance. It was like a 10% increment, then it went to 20, but now we're past that. I have to carry the full amount that my lender and federal government requires me to hold. But again, it's based on what's left of my mortgage, so I'm locked out there, but someone who's going to purchase my home will be expected to pay.
I'll tell you later.
Let me move on to that.
Yeah.
So 2025, what will East Arlington look like?
We're on Covered Bridge and West Arlington. We're going East Arlington.
I guess you're hoping for the downtown.
Downtown, West Arlington, now we're doing East Arlington. Okay.
East Arlington, Josh and Carolyn have done an amazing job of rehabilitating homes in that area that were destined for not great futures. They've created jobs for people in the town. My hope as someone who lives around the corner is it does become my downtown. I'm able to walk to Bonnie and Clyde's on the corner to grab a deli sandwich and go to a little concert over at Josh and Carolyn's.
More sidewalks?
There's actually great sidewalks in that area.
There already is. Not from your house, though, right?
No, not directly from my
But
house.
there is a certain amount of housing on the two side streets, Spruce Lane and something way. What's the other street?
And art and independent movies theater and that old cinema.
Oh, yeah, that used to be a bowling alley.
Yeah. And it was theater.
Independently produced movies, foreign films.
Art
limited release stuff.
galleries. I think just being a young person, there would be some benefit in some kind of shorter term rentals, apartment rentals. I would have loved to move into my own apartment for 2 years while I looked for a house instead of living with my family. I think also touching on Orvis, we have people that come into Orvis and they need a house right now next week, and they I had someone that started at Orvis a few weeks ago, and he sits in my pod, and he emptied out his life savings to get an apartment in New York, and it's like year-long lease, so it's like you're kind of stuck in that.
So Ellie, I think you bring up a good point. Conversations that didn't happen here today, but have kind of happened amongst people that are talking about this all the time. There really is this kind of ladder, right? Allie comes back from college. She has a bunch of debt. She can't really afford much. So there's got to be an entry-level supported type rental, right?
Yes.
And then potentially move up to a better rental, and looking towards the ability to be able to do something around buying housing.
Yes.
Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah. I don't want to have to graduate college and immediately buy a $200,000 home, because maybe that's not what I want. I don't want those responsibilities right now. I don't want to own something. Something I feel like is very apparent in my generation is we like to have options and we like to have choices, and we don't want to be locked into anything.
Entry level.
That's where the green living comes in with the small tiny homes.
To go to show you what can be done in just 1 year in East Arlington. And Jim, your goal here now is let's look at 5 years. In the last year, and we just heard some of this last night, one of the projects that Dr. Sherman and Carolyn Blitz worked on is putting in a recording studio in what was known to locally as the old Tory building. They've invested a lot of money. That studio now is recognized as one of the finest recording studios in the country. And this month, it's been now appearing on the front page of Mix magazine, or that's the top magazine for the recording industry. It's something from East Arlington. And then across the street, the Illustration House has moved from New York City to East Arlington, Vermont. The Illustration House is the one of the largest sellers of illustrations by all the famous illustrators and other illustrators. Ron Reed has moved his operation from New York City to East Arlington. And his dad was a very close friend of Norman Rockwell. So this all has transpired in the last year. So things can happen if we set goals and private development. And I'm very encouraged by it. And I think it was Katie, you were mentioning, right? All that's going on in East Arlington. So it can happen.
Okay, so it's a little after 3. I want to thank all of you for being here, especially the folks that spent the time to hang in with us. I think some of you are going to hear from me when I get ready to kind of pull my notes apart, pull down the stuff that's on the walls, and work with Holly on trying to figure out what we captured for information. I think I'll be coming back to, I hate to make this sound like my old police days, but I'll be down to interview you, Jim. Other folks here that made comments or gave ideas. And my goal would be is that we generate a report from the Renewal Project with clear ideas and recommendations and outcomes no later than probably October. Some people may say, well, why not sooner? It's because I'm a slow writer. So I'm hoping that we can do that. I'm hoping that one of the low-hanging fruits that comes in soon as we continue to work with the Vermont Housing Conservation Board is that we can come to some type of agreement with help on the grant that will take 3 blighted properties and put them into, helps our grant list. It's 3 families potentially move into town. And one of the things that I captured and that I think is big is private-public cooperation and relationships on designing opportunities for housing. So, thank you very much. Appreciate you giving up your day. Any final comments? Any final comments for the day? This is always good because I know people are itching to get out of here. No one's going to say a word, but it sounds like a very...
Very democratic. Good job.